Israeli forces have stepped up air and ground shelling in Gaza, leaving vast areas of the enclave in ruins. The fresh assaults follow more tough talk from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who says there will not be any peace until Hamas is destroyed. Mr. Netanyahu visited northern Gaza yesterday. He told his troops that the battle is far from over, dismissing any speculation of a halt to the fighting. He said Israel would not succeed in freeing its remaining hostages held by Hamas without applying military pressure. The army said it has struck more than 100 targets over a 24-hour period. These include military sites and tunnel shafts in southern and central Gaza. Palestinian officials say ongoing airstrikes and bombardment are taking place near the Burej, Nuseirat and Maghazi refugee camps. Authorities report more than 200 people have been killed and 500 others injured in central Gaza. Hundreds of the wounded were seen arriving at the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis, the largest medical facility in the southern Gaza Strip. Over in the West Bank, 2 Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli raid on a refugee camp near the city of Hebron. Gaza's health ministry said more than 300 people in the West Bank have been killed since the war erupted, most of them women and children. Well, the risk of the conflict spilling over to the broader region is rising. Iraq has condemned U.S. airstrikes in the country, calling them a hostile act that violated its sovereignty. American forces targeted 3 sites used by pro-Iranian fighters in Iraq, saying it was in response to attacks on U.S. personnel in the Middle East. These include one on Erbil Air Base yesterday, which wounded 3 American troops. Baghdad reported that the U.S. strikes killed 1 member of Iraq's security forces, while at least 18 others, including civilians, were wounded. The retaliatory action was reportedly conducted in Babylon and Wasit provinces. The drone attack on U.S. forces yesterday has been claimed by the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. That group says it's opposed to American support for Israel's offensive in Gaza. The U.S. military has repeatedly targeted sites used by Iran and its proxy forces in Iraq and Syria. It says its troops have come under attack at least 100 times in the region since the Israel-Hamas war began nearly 3 months ago. Let's get more now from Trent Murray. He's joining us live from Tel Aviv. Now, Trent, what is the international community and the international aid community doing in response to the surge in these attacks and, of course, that worsening humanitarian situation in Gaza?
Well, there's not a lot they can do on the ground. That is sort of the cold, brutal reality of the situation. The fighting there is just so intense. It's very difficult for international organisations to get in there and help those people that desperately need it. We, of course, are hearing publicly them express concern and step up calls for a ceasefire in order to try and get that much needed humanitarian aid in. We know there are shortages of food, of medicine, of water. We know there's no hospital operating anymore in northern Gaza, and that is why the likes of UN Secretary Antonio Guterres is asking for a pause in the fighting to try and get some of those much needed supplies into people that need them. We know roughly 90% of people living in Gaza now, the population around 2 million, are effectively displaced or homeless and continue to have to be shuffled around within that tight area of space as the fighting moves from one sector to another. But what the Israelis are saying is that they are not going to slow down in their war goals, which is to eradicate Hamas. And they say that Hamas is using civilians as human shields. That's their expression. And they say they are also using civilian infrastructure to carry out attacks on Israeli troops. They released video overnight of the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza where they said weapons were being stored by Hamas, and they also said they found a car there with an Israeli license plate that they believe was taken on October 7th. They found bloodstains in that car, and they believe they belong to a former hostage now who we know has died. So look, I think both sides here are showing little sign of slowing down in the fighting. Hamas continues to fire rockets towards Israel, sort of 81 days into the war, still with that capability. Benjamin Netanyahu, speaking to his troops during the visit to that region, is saying that Israel is not going to stop its war until it achieves all of its goals in its entirety.
Not letting up either is that pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to bring back hostages, bring them back safely. What could this pressure mean then for hope of any new agreement, including that ceasefire deal that was proposed by Egypt, very coolly received?
Well, I mean, there is broad agreement across Israel that all of those hostages do need to be brought home safely. Where things get a little bit more tricky is just how you go about that. There is certainly a strong camp, and the government is of that view, that the military campaign is the way to do it, to apply pressure to Hamas, to force them to the negotiating table. But certainly many of the families here are growing extremely anxious, given how much time has passed now, and many of them now are publicly saying that they just don't think the military option is working and are calling for an increase in negotiations, the type of which we are seeing out of Egypt. We know the Egyptians put forward a plan to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which effectively said in its broad terms that all the Israeli hostages would be able to come home and Hamas would relinquish control of Gaza in return for Israel stopping its operation in its entirety. Hamas reportedly rejected that ceasefire, to which Israeli officials will say that there is some vindication there in the sense that there is a lot of pressure on Israel to announce a ceasefire, but they say there are two parties in this war and Hamas would also need to agree, and they show little sign of wanting to do that.
All right, I will leave it there for now. Thank you so much, Trent Murray, reporting live from Tel Aviv.